Hey, welcome to Audio Listeners. We're all about breaking down the best ideas from great books.
Want to learn from all those amazing books out there, but you just can't find the time?
That's exactly what we do. We pull the key ideas from the best books on growth and motivation.
So you can boost your personal growth, gain powerful knowledge, and find that daily motivation for free.
Here's the cool part. Every book is a complete playlist, so you can learn from start to finish.
So go check out the playlist section. You're going to find something that helps for sure.
And hey, if you like what we're doing, do us a favor and hit that like button.
You're not going to want to miss what's next, so make sure you subscribe for the latest books.
And one last thing, what book should we cover next? Let us know right down in the comments.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into a really powerful strategy of influence, the calculated surprise. We'll break down exactly why being unpredictable is one of the best ways to grab and hold on to someone's attention. And you know, when our source material talks about this, it's not just about romance. It's really about the art of persuasion in, well, pretty much any part of life.
So let's just kick things off with a question for you. Think about any interaction you've had. Could be personal, could be professional. What's the absolute fastest way to lose their interest? Well, it happens at that exact moment they think they've got you all figured out. That's when the spell is broken.
And there's our answer, predictability. The second you become predictable, you're, kind of like a robot, just following a script. You give up that incredible element of surprise. And when you do that, you're basically handing over all the power to the other person. You become mundane instead of mysterious.
So let's explore why routine is the absolute enemy of intrigue, and how it can just totally neutralize any power you might think you have.
Now, the strategy here isn't just about being random for the sake of it. No, the calculated surprise is all about deliberately creating suspense. It's about doing something they'd never expect that gives them a genuine thrill and, wraps you in this awesome aura of mystery.
And to see just how potent this tactic can be, you've got to hear this fantastic historical example from our source. It's about the time the master of seduction himself, Casanova, finally met his match.
Okay, so let's break down this absolute masterclass in unpredictability. The legendary Casanova becomes the one being seduced. So it starts with a mysterious letter from a nun. Then she just shatters his expectations, showing up not as a simple nun, but as this incredibly elegant woman. Then, get this, she surprises him again by meeting him disguised as a man. And the final power move? She swaps herself out with one of his old flames just to prove her complete and total control. It's a brilliant way to keep someone completely off balance.
And the effect this had on Casanova was, well, profound. He actually wrote about his feverish impatience, admitting her unpredictability left him unable to eat or sleep. He was completely consumed, always wondering what she was going to do next.
And this is so important to understand. These weren't just random acts. Every single surprise from Mathilde was a calculated move in a much bigger game. The goal was to totally dismantle the defenses of a master manipulator and make him the bewildered one for a change. So how can you create this kind of intrigue? Well, our source actually lays out a kind of playbook with some really specific tactics. The process is basically a 3-step dance. First, you let people get a baseline impression of you. Let them think you're quiet or maybe super practical. Then, bam, you shatter that impression with something bold or totally creative. And just when they think, okay, now I get them, you pivot and surprise them all over again. By keeping them guessing, you keep them thinking about you. It's that simple.
And this principle applies in so many different situations. Look at Scheherazade. She literally saved her own life by keeping a king hooked with news stories every single night. Or think about Josephine Baker, who completely recaptured the public's imagination by reinventing her whole persona. It's just a crazy powerful tool, whether you're dealing with personal relationships or, the world stage.
So our source really makes this a stark contrast. On one side, you've got reliable. It's safe, it's familiar, but that charm wears off fast. On the other side, you've got unpredictable. That creates tension, suspense, drama. It basically turns everyday life into something thrilling.
And this quote from the source material just sums it all up perfectly. It's blunt, it's memorable. Dogs are reliable. A seducer is not. It just gets right to the heart of the whole argument, doesn't it?
But why is this so incredibly effective? What's the psychology behind our love of suspense? Let's dive into that in our final section.
So the source suggests that deep down, we have this fundamental desire to be led. A genuine surprise kind of short-circuits our rational defenses and our willpower. It pushes us back to this almost childlike state of anticipation, where we're just happily captivated by the person who knows what's coming next.
You know, the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard really hit on this idea perfectly. He saw that surprise is a way to win the game because it just neutralizes the other person's ability to be defensive. Their energy is, like he says, temporarily suspended, which makes them way more open to your influence.
The source uses the perfect metaphor for this, a roller coaster. We love them because we willingly give up control, right? The thrill comes from being thrown in directions we can't predict. It's the pure joy of just letting go and being taken on a ride.
Okay, but here's the crucial warning. This whole tactic can totally backfire. What happens when your surprises start to feel, well, predictable? What if the surprise itself becomes just another routine?
The key takeaway here is you've got to vary the method of your surprise. So, for example, Jiang Qing used the same old trick, mood swings, on Mao Zedong, and eventually it just became an annoying routine. But contrast that with Madame de Pompadour, who kept King Louis XV totally captivated because every surprise was different. A new game, a new fashion, a new party. The surprise itself must never become the predictable part.
And that leaves us with our final thought. The greatest thrill, the most powerful influence, it requires constant invention. Because the moment your target knows all the twists and turns of the roller coaster by heart, the magic is gone, and the ride is over.
All right, today we're talking about language, but not just any language. We're diving into its most powerful, most confusing, and maybe even its most dangerous form, seductive language. Let's get into it. So let me just start with this question. Can words actually be a weapon? I mean, we tend to think of words as tools for, communicating, for telling the truth. But what if they could be used for something else entirely? What if they could be weaponized to confuse, to intoxicate, and to persuade, all while totally bypassing our rational mind? And this quote, wow, it just nails that feeling, doesn't it? The feeling of being on the receiving end of this kind of language. You feel scrambled. Your best arguments, your clearest thoughts, they just seem to melt away. You find yourself convinced, even when some little voice in the back of your head is screaming that you shouldn't be. That's the power we're unpacking today. So what is the core idea here? Well, the source material we're looking at calls it the demonic power of words. Yeah, demonic. It's language that's not used to connect us to what's real, but to actually create a gap between words and reality. Okay, so let's define our terms. Seductive language isn't about telling the truth. Nope, it's about producing an effect. It's a calculated craft. It's all about filling someone's ears with exactly what they're desperate to hear, flattering their deepest insecurities, and just wrapping them up in these beautiful fantasies until their will to resist, well, it just disappears. To really get this, think of it like this: noise versus music. On one side, you've got what we'll call normal language, and it's basically just noise. It's you expressing your feelings, it's pretty self-absorbed, and honestly, most people just tune it out. But then, you have seductive language, and that's music. It's designed specifically for the listener. It says what pleases them. It gets right under their skin. And as you can see, it's intoxicating. All right, let's see this thing in action. For our first case study, we're looking at a true master of seductive oratory at a moment of extreme national crisis. We're talking about General Charles de Gaulle. So picture this. It's 1958. A military coup in French Algeria has pushed France right to the brink of a civil war. The government literally collapses, and in total desperation, they turn to the one guy they think can save them, General de Gaulle. So he flies into Algiers to face this massive, incredibly volatile crowd. Just imagine the scene for a second. The plaza is absolutely electric. Thousands of French colonists are chanting, screaming for Algeria to remain French. They are convinced that de Gaulle, their conservative hero, is there to back them up. Emotions are at a fever pitch. I mean, they are primed and ready to hear exactly what they want to hear. And then he steps up to the mic and says just 4 simple words: "I have understood you." The crowd just erupts. It's everything they wanted to hear. But what did he actually say? Think about it. It could mean, "I understand your cause and I support you." Or it could mean, "I understand what a massive danger you people represent." It is brilliantly and dangerously ambiguous. So how did he pull it off? He followed that ambiguous opener with this perfect cocktail of intoxicating language. You can see it here. He talks about the greatness of France, the resistance, all these powerful emotional triggers. He promises this glorious future. But look at that last point, because it's the whole game. He never once, not once, promises to keep Algeria French. He gave them the feeling they craved, without any of the commitment. And in the end, he granted Algeria its independence. Okay, so that was seduction on a massive public stage. Now let's switch gears completely. Let's see how this works, not in front of a crowd, but inside a single private mind. This is a whole different ballgame, a seduction fought with pen and paper by the character Johannes in Kierkegaard's The Seducer's Diary. And his strategy, wow, it is just so methodical. This is not a rush job. He starts with aloofness, right? Creates some intrigue. Then, bam, a surprise proposal out of nowhere. But even after they're engaged, he keeps his distance. He's preparing the battlefield of her mind, just creating confusion and anxiety. And only then does he unleash his real weapon, the letters. And here's the real kicker. A letter, as Kierkegaard himself points out, can be way more powerful than actually being there in person. Why? Because the person reading it is alone with your words. They're alone with this idealized version of you, and their imagination just runs wild, without your flawed physical reality getting in the way. You see, for this kind of seducer, the ultimate goal isn't just physical. It's about mental possession. By flooding Cordelia's mind with his beautiful, intoxicating words, Johannes gets her to start thinking like him, talking like him, repeating his ideas as if they were her own. He conquers her imagination first. Okay, so we've got the general and we've got the philosopher. Now, let's pull back the curtain and really deconstruct this music. What are the core principles that make this kind of language so darn effective? The first and most crucial shift, the one you have to make, is this. You have to stop using language just to express yourself. You have to start seeing words as tools chosen very deliberately to produce a specific effect in your listener. You're moving from just self-expression to calculated influence. And here are some of those tools in the toolbox. For instance, check out that first one. Flatter insecurities, not strengths. That is a killer psychological insight. You don't tell a beautiful person they're beautiful. You praise their intelligence. Or look at number 5. Keep it vague, just like de Gaulle did. This lets people hear whatever they want to hear. You're basically creating a pleasant fog for them, not a crystal clear argument. And really, it all comes down to this quote right here. This isn't just about being a smooth talker. It's about having deep psychological insight. It's about the ability to understand what a person is desperate to hear, where their vanities are, and what their deepest fantasies look like. This brings us to our final, and honestly, our most profound idea in this whole breakdown, the fundamental difference between two basic types of language. So check this out. On the left, you've got symbolic language. It comes from the Greek for to bring together. Its whole job is to tie words to reality. It's all about clarity. But on the right, you have diabolic language, and that comes from the Greek for to throw apart. Its whole purpose is to intentionally separate words from reality. Its goal is illusion, confusion, and fantasy. And if you need one single image to remember all this by, it's the clouds. Diabolic, seductive language literally lifts the listener up into a fog. And up there, in the clouds, everything is vague, reality is fuzzy, and the imagination is totally free to create whatever it wants to see. It's a mental space where it's very, very easy to lose your way. So we're left with one final question, and it's really a question for you. Now that you know the melody, now that you've seen the structure of this kind of language, can you hear its music playing in the world around you? In politics, in advertising, maybe even in your own life? It's something worth listening for. You know, we're often told that if you want to win someone over, you've got to make these big, grand gestures. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the real secret to influence isn't in the big stuff, but in the tiny, carefully managed details? Today, we're diving into this counterintuitive idea, how small, orchestrated details can be way more powerful than any grand statement. And just think about that for a second. When someone's laying it on thick, over-the-top compliments, huge promises, doesn't a little alarm bell go off in your head? It just feels fake, right? Well, the source material we're looking at today says that instinct is absolutely right. And this, right here, is the core idea we're going to unpack. True influence isn't about shouting from the rooftops. It's about conducting a subtle symphony of small, thoughtful actions. It's about crafting little rituals, engaging a person's senses, and creating an experience so detailed and mesmerizing that it just slips right past all their rational defenses. To really see how this works, let's jump in a time machine and head back to 1898 China. We're about to see a masterclass in political theater put on by one of the most powerful women in the country's history. Okay, so picture this. The political climate is super tense. Western powers are really suspicious of the Empress Dowager Tetsuhu. They think she's this cruel traditionalist who's stopped modernization and might have even hurt her own nephew, the emperor. So into this atmosphere of total distrust, what does she do? She invites the wives of the 7 most important Western ambassadors to a banquet. The second these wives arrive, the show is on. They're carried in on sedan chairs by court eunuchs wearing these brilliant, shining uniforms. This isn't just a welcome, it's the first layer of an overwhelming spectacle designed to immediately set a tone of incredible splendor and power. But she's just getting started. The spectacle keeps building. After the eunuchs, the wives are greeted by a whole group of Manchu court ladies decked out in a rainbow of gorgeous traditional costumes with these high, jewel-encrusted headdresses. The sensory overload is kicking into high gear. And then, for the grand finale of this visual feast, the Empress herself. Now, she's actually a pretty small woman, but sitting on this massive jewel-studded dragon throne, wearing these incredible brocaded robes and a huge pearl necklace. She looks like a giant. It's pure theater, and it's designed to literally take their breath away. So after this visual shock and awe, she switches gears to personal charm. She gives each woman a pearl ring, she speaks in this beautiful, enchanting voice, and then, in this moment of pure genius, she takes a sip from each woman's teacup before handing it to them, saying with all this emotion, "One family, all one family." Well, it worked. The wives left totally charmed. They were convinced the Empress was warm, she was trustworthy. They ran back to their husbands and said, "Hey, the Emperor's fine. We've totally misjudged this woman." But was that what was really going on? Because the reality was a whole different story. The truth is, the Empress couldn't stand Westerners. The Emperor had actually plotted against her, and she had him locked up. The entire banquet, every single detail was a performance. It was a brilliant distraction to keep the Western powers from looking any closer. She created an illusion so powerful it completely hid her ruthless intentions. What the Empress created here is what we're going to call the mesmerizing effect. She basically flooded her guests' senses with so much color, so much ceremony, so much charm that they couldn't focus on anything else. They were so distracted by all the pleasant little details that they completely missed the dark reality. Their critical thinking, totally shut down. Okay, so that's a huge political stage. But let's see how this exact same principle works in the much more intimate world of courtship. This is where the details get even more personal, more focused, and way more powerful. So let's meet Prince Genji from 11th century Japan. He's fallen for his ward, a young woman named Tamakazura, but she only sees him as a kind of father figure. A direct approach is never going to work, so he goes indirect. First, he actually encourages his own brother to go after her. This makes him look less like a suitor and makes her lower her guard. Then, he starts to fill her world with all these incredible sensory details. And this was Genji's brilliant insight. He knew that you can argue with words, but you can't really argue with the sensory experience. He started surrounding her with his own personal, intoxicating perfumes. He'd wear these vibrant robes that made his rival look totally dull. He'd send her letters on this beautiful scented paper and give her gifts of really unique flowers. What Genji created was a sensual whirlpool. He orchestrated these kodo lessons where they'd lie side by side, gazing out at a torchlit garden. He was pulling her into this romantic fantasy world. Her senses were so overwhelmed with the sheer pleasure of his company that her rational mind just couldn't keep up. She was completely drawn in, and pretty soon, resistance felt impossible. So you've got the Empress's grand public spectacle and the prince's intimate personal trap. Two totally different stories, but they're using the same playbook. So let's break it down. How do you actually orchestrate details to create this kind of effect? The whole key is to bypass logic and go straight for the senses. You attack on multiple fronts at once. Your voice, your gestures, your gifts, the clothes you wear. You figure out what a person needs without them even having to say it, and you provide it, creating this subtle dependency. You make your attention feel completely individualized, like they're the only person in the world, and you slow everything down, turning your interactions into a kind of hypnotic, unforgettable ritual. And hey, this isn't just something from ancient history or old novels. Look at someone like Pamela Harriman. She would secretly find out what powerful men liked and then fill their homes with their favorite flowers and food. Or think about Rudolph Valentino in silent films. His slow, attentive gestures completely changed what women expected from romance. Or Prime Minister Disraeli, who charmed Queen Victoria not with diamonds, but with simple, symbolic primroses that made her think of him every single time she saw one. All of this really comes down to one fundamental idea. It's about tapping into the power of the unspoken language and recognizing that what we do is almost always more powerful than what we say. There is this fantastic quote from Castiglione that just nails it. We all know this instinctively, right? That real feelings are often shown in a small gesture, or even a moment of shyness, way more than in some long, elaborate speech. I mean, at the end of the day, it's this simple. Words are cheap. Anyone can say, "I care about you." But a thoughtful gesture, a carefully chosen gift, those things speak on a much deeper level. Why? Because they take time, they take effort, they take real attention. They feel substantial, they feel real. So if you want one single image to remember this whole concept by, it's the banquet. It's an entire environment where every single detail, the food, the music, the lighting, the decor, is all working together to create a specific mood. It's a feast for the senses, designed to make us relax, lower our guard, and focus our attention exactly where the host wants it. And that really leaves us with one final question to think about. In our own lives, in the marketing we see, in politics, even in our own relationships, what are the subtle details, the small rituals, and the sensory experiences that are being orchestrated all around us? And maybe more importantly, where are they trying to direct our attention? Thanks for joining me.
You know, have you ever met someone who just sticks in your mind? Long after they've gone, you're still thinking about them. While other people, well, they just fade away the second they leave the room. It's not magic, I promise you. It's a really delicate art. And today, we're going to dive deep into the psychology of allure and how some of the most unforgettable people in history mastered this dance between presence and absence.
I mean, think about it. We've all been there, right? You feel that initial spark with someone new, that intense, almost electric excitement. And then, slowly, it just cools off. Maybe it turns into something comfortable, sure, but that magnetic pull, it's gone. So what's going on there? Why does that happen so often?
Well, this quote right here, it kind of reveals the whole game. This is the turning point. The very moment your absence becomes a relief to someone, instead of something that makes them ache a little, it's over. So you see, the real question isn't how to fill up someone's time, but how to completely occupy their mind.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for cracking this code. We're going to start with what I call the curse of familiarity. Then we'll get into the antidote, the art of poetic presence. We'll see it play out with a fantastic case study on Eva Peron. After that, we'll look at the psychology behind it all, with Stendhal's secret of crystallization. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the essential keys to creating that lasting allure.
All right, first up, the curse of familiarity. It's this strange, almost backward idea that being too real, too predictable, and too present all the time can actually make you forgettable. But why? Well, it's because it leaves zero space for the one thing that truly ignites attraction: idealization.
And let's be super clear here. This isn't about, playing hard to get or just avoiding someone. The real killer isn't how often they see you, it's how predictable you are. When you're too obvious, too human, there are no gaps for their mind to fill in. And with no room for fantasy, there's just no fuel for the fire of attraction.
So if that constant, boring familiarity is the problem, what's the solution? It's something we call the art of poetic presence. And this is all about shifting your entire goal. You're not trying to just be there anymore. You're trying to occupy their thoughts, especially when you're not around.
So what does that actually look like in practice? Well, it's a very specific rhythm. You create these intense, unforgettable moments when you're together, and then you purposefully pull back. You create some distance. This push and pull, it forces their imagination to kick into high gear. They stop associating you with everyday, mundane stuff and start associating you with these big, poetic ideals. Romance, adventure, a little bit of mystery. You're basically creating a powerful halo around the memory of you.
This whole strategy really comes down to 3 core tactics. Number 1, you alternate presence and absence. That creates yearning. It's that calculated distance. Number 2, you consciously tie yourself to powerful poetic images. Think of an archetype: the hero, the artist, the rebel. You embody an ideal. And number 3, you feed their fantasies by staying just a little bit elusive. using subtle inconsistencies to keep them guessing, not just confirming what they think they know.
Now, to see how powerful this really is, let's look at a true master of the game, Eva Perón. Seriously, her transformation into Evita, the spiritual leader of Argentina, is the perfect case study. She used this idea of poetic presence to seduce not just a single person, but an entire nation.
Okay, just look at this timeline. First, in 1944, she makes herself absolutely essential to Colonel Perón. She's always there. She's echoing his own ideas. She's making him feel like the most powerful man in the world. That's the intense presence phase. But then, the critical moment comes in 1945. He gets thrown in prison, and for the first time, he is completely alone, separated from her. And that absence, that is what turned his affection into a full-blown obsession. She later used this exact same tactic on the whole country with her big tour of Europe. And then her tragic death at 33. I mean, that just cemented her mythic status forever.
And listen to this quote from a letter Perón wrote her from prison. This says it all. "My immense solitude is full of your memory." Her physical absence forced him to live with the idea of her, an idea that his mind was totally free to perfect and idealize, without all the messy parts of reality getting in the way. He wasn't just missing a person, he was falling deeply in love with his own fantasy of her.
And get this, she did the exact same thing to the entire country. While she was off on that huge European tour, people back in Argentina weren't seeing the controversial actress anymore. No, they were reading these incredible stories about huge, ecstatic crowds in Spain, about her meeting the Pope. Her absence allowed them to fill in all the gaps, to see her not as she was, but as a symbol of their own national pride and their destiny.
So, what do we call this psychological process that's going on here? Well, way back in the 19th century, a writer named Stendhal, he actually gave it a name: crystallization. It's his brilliant theory for what's actually happening inside our brains when we fall head over heels in love.
Okay, the metaphor Stendhal uses is just stunning. He talks about the salt mines in Salzburg. You take a plain, leafless, dead-looking branch and toss it down into an abandoned mine shaft. You leave it there for a few months. When you pull it back out, it's completely covered in these beautiful, shining salt crystals. The original branch is barely even visible. And he says our minds do the exact same thing. When we're left alone with our thoughts, our imagination just starts covering the idea of someone we desire with all these glittering perfections, whether they're real or not.
Now, Stendhal identified two key stages of this. The first crystallization is all about hope. You start imagining all these perfections onto someone because you really hope they can be yours. But it's the second crystallization that is way, way more powerful. And its trigger isn't hope, it's doubt. That little flicker of uncertainty, that fear that you might actually lose them, that's what sends your imagination into total overdrive. And this is so crucial. A little bit of doubt is the secret ingredient for creating the most potent form of allure.
Okay, so we've looked at the problem, we've looked at the strategy, we've even looked at the deep psychology. So now, let's boil all of this down into the core principles, the real keys you can use to create that same kind of lasting allure.
So here's the playbook, really. First, you have to remember that people want to idealize. They're looking for something to believe in. Your job is just to give their imagination some space to do its thing, so you have to maintain some mystery. Next, embody a poetic ideal, whether it's romance, intelligence, rebellion, whatever. Connect yourself to something bigger than the everyday. Create really memorable, heightened moments when you're together, so they associate you with excitement, not with boredom. And critically, don't be afraid to introduce a tiny bit of doubt to spark that powerful second crystallization. And finally, use absence to your advantage. A little note, a thoughtful gift, these things make you feel present even when you're miles away.
When you put it all together, the goal is to create a halo. Now, it's not a real halo, obviously. It's that glow of fantasy and possibility that you carefully build in someone's mind through this whole dance of presence and absence. And that halo, that's what separates someone who is truly unforgettable from someone who is just familiar.
And that kind of leaves us with one final question to think about. See, this art of allure, it isn't just about attracting other people, it's about the story you're projecting out into the world. So the question is really for you. When people think of you, in those quiet moments when they're all alone, what do they see? What kind of halo are you creating?
Hey, welcome. Today, we are diving into a really fascinating, kind of counterintuitive idea, how showing your weakness can actually be your greatest source of power. I mean, think about it. We're always told to be strong, project confidence, hide our flaws, right? But what if that's not the whole story? what if the real key to disarming people, to really winning them over, isn't about strength at all, but about showing just the right kind of vulnerability? Let's get into it. So, to really understand this, we're going to look at a story from 18th century France. It's from the classic novel Dangerous Liaisons, and believe me, it is an absolute masterclass in psychological games. Okay, so first, meet our target, the Présidente de Touvel. You gotta picture her as this fortress of virtue. She is deeply religious, completely devoted to her husband, and has zero interest in all the drama of high society. Basically, on paper, she's untouchable. And then he shows up, the Vicomte de Valmont. This guy's reputation precedes him everywhere. He's a legendary seducer, a total scandal. So you'd think he'd come in with this big direct assault, right? All charm and masculine confidence. But he does the exact opposite. He's quiet. He seems kind of melancholy. And the strangest part? He completely ignores her. Now, for a beautiful woman who's used to fighting off unwanted attention, this is, well, it's confusing. And it makes her curious in a way that aggression never, ever could. So she starts watching him, trying to figure this guy out. She even has him followed. And what she finds just blows her mind. He's not out hunting like he says he is. He's secretly giving money to a poor family. And she's just amazed. She thinks, wow, could this dangerous man actually be changing? Could I be the one to save his soul? And then comes the masterstroke. He confesses, but not like a predator. He confesses like a victim. He tells her that her goodness has completely overwhelmed him, that he's helpless against it, that he's a slave to this love he can't control. He flips the script entirely and basically says, "You're the one who did this to me." He makes himself weak, and by doing that, he makes her feel powerful and maybe even a little responsible for him. The philosopher Jean Baudrillard just nails it with this quote. It perfectly captures what's happening. Valmont isn't just pretending to be weak. He's using that appearance of weakness to actually weaken her defenses. The Presidente is, of course, thrown into total chaos. Her pity for him starts to morph into something that feels a lot like love. But we, looking from the outside, have to ask the real question. Was any of that real? Or was this just the most sophisticated, calculated move in the book? All right, let's pull back the curtain and really dissect this. How on earth did Valmont manage to turn his weakness into such an unstoppable weapon? Okay, so let's break it down. This wasn't random. It was a very deliberate four-step play. First, he sparked her curiosity by acting all sad and mysterious. Then, he faked being virtuous with that act of charity, an act he knew she'd find out about. Next, he just overwhelmed her with that sudden emotional confession. And finally, the killer move. He positioned himself as her victim. That made her feel guilty, powerful, and ultimately responsible for his feelings. And this brings us to the core idea of this whole explainer, what we call strategic weakness. It's really an art form. It's all about making the other person feel like they're the strong one, the one in control, by appearing vulnerable and maybe a little helpless. When they feel superior, their guard just drops. So why is this so darn effective? Well, psychologically, it's like a skeleton key. It just bypasses all our normal defenses and suspicions. It's also incredibly flattering to our ego. Who doesn't like to feel like the powerful one in a dynamic? And most brilliantly, it takes an emotion like pity or sympathy and expertly transforms it into affection, even love. And hey, this is not just something from an old French novel. Some of the most confident, powerful figures in history were absolute masters at using their frailties to their advantage. Now, this is what I find so fascinating. Take guys like Lord Byron or JFK. Their public image was all about power, confidence, almost danger. But their secret weapon, their seductive weakness, was something totally different. It was this unexpected shyness, physical frailties, deep-seated insecurities. And that vulnerability didn't take away from their power. It made it human. It made them magnetic. It made people want to get closer to protect them. But here's the thing. You can't just apply this strategy randomly. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. It has to be tailored, customized to the specific psychology of the person you're dealing with. So the key here is that the application has to be strategic. The tactics you're seeing play on some pretty traditional ideas. For instance, a man showing a softer, more emotional side can be really disarming to someone expecting aggression. And on the flip side, a woman projecting a bit of frailty can tap into someone's desire to be a protector, which boasts their own ego and makes them feel strong. In both cases, the person who seems weak is actually the one controlling the dynamic. Okay, now this is absolutely critical. We have to talk about the huge, massive difference between a seductive vulnerability and just plain old neediness, which is a complete turnoff. The weaknesses that really work are the ones that seem authentic, like they just slip out, a moment of shyness, an unexpected tear. What does not work is complaining, whining, or actively begging for sympathy. That stuff doesn't come across as charming. It comes across as manipulative and annoying, and it shatters the whole illusion instantly. I mean, take it from Ninon de l'Enclos, one of the greatest courtesans of the 17th century. She loved a man with a softer side, but the second he started complaining, she was done. The spell was broken. The weakness has to feel genuine, not pathetic. And this, right here, perfectly illustrates the entire concept. Think about it. Total perfection is intimidating. It can even be a little cold. It's the small flaw, the blemish, the beauty mark that draws us in. That's what makes something or someone feel human and relatable and lovable. Your strategic weakness, that's your beauty mark. It's what softens your strengths and makes you completely irresistible. So that really leads us with one final thought. We all have vulnerabilities. We all have flaws. The real question is, are we desperately trying to hide them, or are we using them strategically? Which of your blemishes, your imperfections, are the ones that make you human? And which ones do you let the world see? Today, we're diving into something really powerful, the seductive, almost magnetic pull of a perfectly crafted illusion. But what's even crazier isn't the illusion itself, but how much we, as humans, want to believe in it. You know, Shakespeare absolutely nailed this centuries ago. He's basically saying our brains are just wired for fantasy, that we're built to grasp things that cold, hard logic can't quite touch. And that fertile ground of desire, that's exactly where the most powerful illusions take root. I mean, really think about that for a second. What if someone could not just tell you a story, but actually build your daydreams right in front of you? A world tailored perfectly to your most secret desires? How far would you let it go? What would you be willing to accept as real? Okay, so let's get into what makes an illusion perfect. We're not talking about a simple fib here. No, this is something else entirely. It's like an entire reality, custom built for one person. And the key is, it's a reality they're absolutely desperate to believe in. The real magic here, the secret sauce, is that it goes straight for our hidden desires. You know, the stuff we've pushed down or maybe don't even admit to ourselves. The person creating the illusion isn't just tricking you. They're making your own mind their partner in crime. You become an active part of the act without even realizing it. All right, to really see how this plays out in the real world, let's get into our first story. And trust me, this one it's wild. It's about a fantasy that became so real, it sustained an impossible reality for 2 whole decades. Our story starts with the perfect target, Bernard Boisrescout. He's young, he's isolated in a foreign country, and he's just craving the kind of exotic adventure he's only read about. He's basically a walking, talking, open door for someone to come in and sell him a fantasy. Now look at how this unfolds. This wasn't a quick con. We're talking about a slow burn over 20 years. First, he meets this captivating opera singer. Then comes the bombshell confession. A few years later, boom, there's a son. Each new layer just pulled him deeper and deeper in, which made the final truth, when it came out in 1983, completely earth-shattering. And just listen to Boisrescout's own words. He says it all right there. He knew the real deception wasn't just physical. It was all taking place inside his own head. His mind was the stage, and he was already living in a fantasy world, light years away from the truth. So that's a one-on-one deception. But what's really fascinating is that this exact same dynamic, it doesn't just work on individuals. You can scale it up, way up. You can use it to fool a powerful ruler and even alter the perception of an entire empire. Let's jump to 1787. Catherine the Great of Russia has this massive ambition. She wants to prove that Russia is a modern, powerful force. So she tells her favorite advisor, Gregory Potemkin, to make their new territory, Crimea, look like a shining example of her success. And, crucially, she wants to go see it for herself. And the scale of what Potemkin did is just mind-blowing. He didn't just write a report, he built her a literal traveling movie set. As her boat floated down the river, she saw these bustling, thriving villages. The reality? They were often just painted facades. Those happy peasants? costumed actors. And get this, at night, they would pack everything up and race downriver to set up the next fake village before she arrived. Absolutely incredible. The effect was total. This wasn't just a tour for her. She was completely swept away. The illusion was so perfectly aligned with her own ambitions that it transported her into her own historical fantasy. She wasn't just seeing a province. She was living out her legacy, feeling like a modern-day Alexander the Great or Cleopatra. So, we've seen two massive illusions, one personal, one political. How do you actually pull this off? Well, it turns out whether you're fooling a lonely man or a powerful empress, there's a kind of playbook, a 4-step guide to building the perfect illusion. And if you look back at our stories, both Shipei-Pu and Potemkin followed these steps to a T. They both started slow, building trust. Then they zeroed in on that one deep secret desire, adventure for Borizaku, imperial greatness for Catherine. And from there, they just kept blurring the lines until the fantasy felt more real than reality itself. And that third step, creating the uncanny, that's the real genius move. It's a concept from Freud, but all it really means is making the fantasy feel familiar yet strange, like a dream coming to life right in front of you. It resonates with something deep inside, which makes it almost impossible to question. But here's the thing. A playbook is totally useless if the other person isn't willing to play the game. And that brings us to the most important question of all. Why do these illusions work so well? Why are we so willing to go along for the ride? Oh, the bottom line is, we're not just passive victims here. Our own minds are active participants. When an illusion speaks to a powerful emotional need, like Boris Kaut's desire for love or Catherine's for greatness, our rational brain just, well, it takes a back seat. We don't just believe the fantasy, we actually help build it. So you can think of the perfect illusion as someone handing you a ticket to your own personal Shangri-La, that mythical, perfect place that exists in the back of all our minds. And when someone offers you that journey, you don't just trust them, you fall in love. And that leaves us with one final kind of unsettling thought to chew on. When an illusion becomes so complete that it basically replaces reality, it makes you wonder, who's really being deceived the most? Them or you? Have you ever wondered what it would be like to have someone so focused on you that their entire world just melts away? Well, that's the core of a really powerful and, let's be honest, pretty controversial strategy from Robert Greene's The Art of Seduction. Today, we are going to break down this tactic of isolating a person to make them completely and totally vulnerable to your influence. Greene really doesn't pull any punches, does he? He starts with this incredibly blunt statement. But think about it for a second. Our sense of who we are, our confidence, a lot of that is held up by our daily routines, our friends, our family. Greene's whole argument is that if you can carefully strip those supports away, a person doesn't just change a little, they become malleable. So what does this actually look like in practice? We're not talking about anything physical here. Seductive isolation is a much more subtle psychological game. It's really the art of carefully cutting someone's strings to their normal life. Their support systems, their routines, and all those voices of reason that usually keep them grounded. And this strategy really operates on two fronts. First, you've got the psychological attack. This is like an internal takeover where you just occupy so much of their mental space that there's no room for anyone or anything else. Then, you've got the physical attack, literally pulling them out of the places and away from the people that keep them anchored. So let's dive into a couple of case studies to see how these were used with just devastating effect. To see just how insanely powerful this can be, we have to go way back. We're talking 5th century BC China. This is the incredible story of Hui Si and how she used what Greene calls the exotic effect to make a king give up his entire world. So, meet our target, King Fu Chai. This guy is at the absolute peak of his power. He's rich, he's just beaten his rivals, and he feels completely safe inside the walls of his kingdom. He thinks he's untouchable, the last person on Earth you'd think could be swayed by anyone. And now meets the weapon designed to bring him down. His Shi wasn't just some beautiful woman. Oh no, she was a meticulously crafted agent of chaos. Her defeated king had her trained for 3 whole years, perfecting her skills for this one single mission. She was the key part of a very slow, very patient game of revenge. This quote just perfectly captures her impact from moment one. It wasn't just her looks. It was her whole vibe. Her exoticism, this unfamiliar confidence, her talents. It was all a calculated performance, designed to be so captivating that the king was instantly mesmerized. He was caught in what the author calls a net of fascination. And just look at how fast he fell. It's chillingly methodical. It starts with that psychological influence. I mean, within a week, she's in his political meetings. Then it escalates to physical isolation when he builds her that palace outside the capital. And that palace, it becomes her entire world, which, in turn, becomes his only world. He just completely detaches from his duties, his advisors, his kingdom, until there's absolutely nothing left. Okay, so that was an epic story of using isolation for political ruin. Now let's jump forward to the 20th century for a story of pure romantic seduction. We're going to see how Prince Ali Khan used a totally different style of the same strategy on Hollywood's own love goddess Rita Hayworth. So our target here is Rita Hayworth. She was known to the world as the love goddess, but in 1948 she was in a really vulnerable place. Her marriage to the famous Orson Welles was over, and her career felt like it had stalled out. She was looking for an escape, which of course made her the perfect target for a master seducer. And here is that seducer, Prince Ali Khan. Well, he was more than just a playboy. He was a predator. According to Greene, he saw Rita in a movie and just decided, she will be mine. He left nothing to chance. He actually engineered their first meeting so he would be seated right next to her at a party. The game was on. This quote just reveals his primary weapon, this overwhelming, undivided attention. This wasn't just flattery. It was this intense, almost hypnotic focus that made a woman feel like she was the absolute center of the universe. By making her a queen, he was subtly making himself the king of her world, the only one who truly saw her. That is the essence of psychological isolation. His campaign was an absolute masterclass in escalation. It started with psychological saturation, constant calls and flowers, just to occupy her mind. Then he started to eliminate rivals, insisting she break dates with other men. He even hired a fortune teller to plant this idea that they were destined to be together. And once he had her hooked psychologically, he started the physical isolation, first his private chateau, and then, the final move, a trip to Spain, where a manufactured press frenzy made him her one and only protector. So we've got two very different stories, centuries apart, but both of them use the exact same underlying principle. Let's break down the playbook here and see how these methods actually compare. You can see it laid out right here, two different paths leading to the same destination. She used her exoticism to create a physical bubble, a new palace that literally pulled the king away from his job. Ali Khan, on the other hand, used intense attention to create a psychological bubble, crowding out every other thought from Rita's mind. The methods were different, sure, but the result was exactly the same: total dependency. So if you boil it all down, the playbook is a 4-stage process. First, you flood their world with attention. Then, you disturb their habits, you pull them into your environment. Step 3 is alienation, where you subtly poison them against their own support system. And the final, crucial step, you become their only source of comfort, the single point of stability in the chaos that you yourself created. And to really capture the essence of this whole idea, Robert Greene uses a really powerful and familiar symbol: the Pied Piper. I mean, the metaphor is perfect, right? The target is so enchanted by the beautiful music, the attention, the excitement, that they don't even realize they're being led away from their home, their family, their entire life. It's not a kidnapping, it's a willing, hypnotic journey, right into a trap. Now, this might all sound like ancient history or some old Hollywood drama, but Greene argues this dynamic is more relevant today than ever. So let's connect this back to our own modern lives. This is the key insight for the modern world. Greene argues that we're all like that king. We each have our own tiny kingdom, our career, our family, our responsibilities, and we build these walls of habit around ourselves just to cope with it all. We become preoccupied, defensive, and we think we're immune to outside influence. Just think about it. These are our modern safety nets, our routines, our friends, our comfortable habits. They give us a sense of comfort and control. But, and this is the big but, the source points out that that very comfort can lead to boredom, making us secretly ripe for a distraction, ripe for something new and exotic to come and pull us away. But there's a really critical warning here. This is a delicate game. If you try to isolate someone too quickly, you're going to set off all their alarm bells and they will run. The real art is in the gradual replacement. You don't just take away their old comforts, you skillfully replace them with new ones that are all centered around you. And this all brings us to a huge final question for our time. In an age where we are constantly connected, where our phones are always buzzing, are we actually more vulnerable? Does all of that digital noise make it even easier for one single person, one voice, one presence, to cut through all the static, dominate our thoughts, and achieve a state of psychological isolation that the seducers of the past could only dream of? It's definitely something to think about.